Hi, noticers. It's Urvi, Maggie, and our esteemed and wonderful and beautiful and amazing guest, Rupal Patel. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hi.
So, by way of introduction of Rupal, I mean, there is just so much to say. And I'm going to try to keep it brief here and then invite Rupal to share anything I've missed that is ultra important to share at the top of our conversation. Rupal is has a high octane career that's taken her from military briefing rooms in jungles and war zones to corporate boardrooms and international stages. During her thrilling career as an analyst and field agent at the CIA, she's advised four-star generals, she's earned war zone service medals, and she was recognized by the CIA director for her superior support to the President of the United States. So after leaving the CIA, she earned an MBA, and she also started an award-winning business over a decade ago. She's been called a power woman by Harper's Bazaar magazine and a super strategist by her clients. She's sought after in the international speaking space, a corporate consultant, an executive advisor, and she's spoken in front of thousands of people to talk about leadership and talent development. She is so committed to developing the next generation of leaders and change makers, and it extends, into her pro bono work that she does for Virgin Startup and Techstars. And she's also an entrepreneur in residence at the London Business School. She is an author of the international bestseller From CIA to CEO, Unconventional Life Lessons for Thinking Bigger, Leading Better, and Being Bolder, which has been translated into multiple languages at this point and has been hailed an essential manual and one of the best business books. And I concur at her TED Talk that explores the power of owning your weird to unleash your personal excellence. Thank you for joining. I want to read so much more. There's so much just juiciness to everything that you've created and put out into the world. Is there anything I missed that you're like, I also want to note this?
I've got two gorgeous little girls who are 3 and 7.
Yes. Who I fortunately get to say through marriage are my nieces. So Rupal and I are cousins-in-law.
Yeah. Yes, we are.
So Rupal, we would love to kick it off with, given all of the your history and all of the stories and life experiences that you've had, what is sort of the origin of it all? What is, I know that's a big one, but what story brings you about yourself, or, kind of what took you to the place you are today? What's that pivotal moment that kind of changed everything for you?
I think the honest answer to that, or not, I think the honest answer to that is, there was no pivotal moment. And I think for me, the reason my life and career has taken all of these twists and turns is because I never really knew what I wanted to do. I never really had a clear vision for yes, I want to do this, and then I'm going to do that. I've just always been very curious about the world around me, very open to interesting opportunities or ideas, and I love to learn. So I'm constantly, I love to read. I'm always finding ways to just learn about things that are totally random, just because I think the world is a crazy and interesting place and there's so much out there. So to quote a horribly good movie, Along Came Polly, I'm on the non-plan plan of life. And I think that's part of what's made it, sort of full of lots of different kinds of things. And just, like I said, leaving myself open to trying and exploring instead of feeling hedged in by just this is what I want and this is the one thing that I'm going to do. It's been much more evolutionary and much more exploratory than that.
And that deeply resonates, because I think and Maggie, I know this resonates with you, and we've talked about it before, is that saying, all who wander are not lost. And I feel I have a similar approach to life now. And probably always did. And that's why things were always meandering. And, it's not, I feel as though for a lot of society, like that is breaking of norms. Like it's not, it's non-traditional, quote unquote, right? Unconventional, whatever word you use, non-conformist. And I think that can be there's a solo, or lonely feeling about that sometimes. And really it's like, when you're not strong of mind or you haven't really checked in with yourself, it can be disorienting. And so I found that like, oh my goodness, how can I keep going this way? But knowing and nurturing like that curiosity you shared. So how do you have
just time out real quick because this is so casual, but like the CIA is not that casual. So it's like, I like to explore and try new things, but I don't think the CIA would hire me. So if I could just interrupt and make how casual you are, because I'm over here laughing. I'm like, I like to try new things, but like the CIA is not a little thing. And Urvi, I interrupted your question, but that's like where my mind is. I'm like, how do you have this kind of attitude and approach when you've done like that's a really big high stress, I would imagine, war zones, from what Urvi had said. So how do you take, and we can piggyback off each other's questions if they're similar, but what was the curiosity that led you to that field to begin with, and how did you maintain this adventurous, curious spirit in such high stress situations?
Ooh, I love this question. And thank you for bringing it back and also sort of forcing me to check myself, because you're right. It was definitely a non-traditional path, but I guess the unifying thread in everything that I've done is always pursuing excellence and always pushing myself as hard as I possibly could to just test my limits and see what I was made of. And that showed up in school. It showed up when I played soccer. It showed up in my career in different ways. And so it was this combination of like that pursuit of excellence, that testing myself, pushing myself, and also layering on top of that, that exploratory, experimental approach to let's see what it could look like in this arena. And let's see what excellence can look like in that arena. That has been that red thread throughout my life. And the way the CIA happened is it did kind of happen in the sense that it wasn't on my radar. It wasn't a career that I thought it was relevant for me because I didn't think people like me could get jobs at the CIA. And when I say people like me, I mean sort of, not really wanting to be a spy out and like sort of recruiting assets and not being a James Bond type of person. And because that's what I thought it was. And so I was at graduate school. I was getting a master's in international affairs at the University of Chicago. And while I was there, the CIA recruited me. And they asked me if I was interested in applying for a role. And I was surprised probably more than anyone else because I didn't, like I said, think there were roles that were more analytical, more in what I felt were my more natural tendencies of just like developing expertise, really going deep into issues and that kind of thing. And when they effectively asked me to have a chat and I started to go through that process of understanding what a career at the agency would look like, it just ticked all of the right boxes. I sort of refer to it in my book about appealing to my inner nerd and my inner badass, right? So I could geek out on issues. I could get really deep and understand the complexities behind these big global issues and U.S. foreign policy, and also serve in the field, and also volunteer to go and be a briefer in a war zone. So it was this really nice marriage of two sides of who I am that felt almost impossible that there was a job out there that could do that. So that's how it happened. And it felt really, really natural the more I went through that process and got to understand what I was doing. And then, of course, once I started and got to meet my colleagues and get stuck into the actual work, it felt like just the perfect fit without me even realizing that there was such a perfect fit out there.
And so I'm curious because obviously you have an incredible book that is an essential manual to kind of understanding like your leadership and also, but what you're saying about like the pursuit of excellence and also like the pursuit of things that are kind of unknown, right? Like in the CIA, there's a lot unknown. And then in life, there's a lot unknown. And even you're pursuing that when that was not on your radar. And then, having an amazing career that came out of it or came through it, right? Like even in that time that you were there, to be honored in the way that you were for like your impact. What can you talk about like the pursuit of excellence a little bit more and just how you see that, the key components, maybe like the essential elements of like what excellence and how it shows up for you and how you support others in cultivating it?
Yeah. I think for me, it's about having really high standards for myself. I am perhaps a really harsh judge of my own self and my own performance. And that, of course, will extend to others because I just sort of project. I was like, well, if this is the standard I hold myself to, then that's, should be appropriate for others. I recognize that is not the case, right? And that's not good leadership. But that is this idea of like, actually, I'll tell the story. So, and Urvi, this might resonate with you, and Maggie, perhaps even you, because I'm from an Indian immigrant family, and the stereotype was at least true in our family that you pursue higher education and a professional career, and sort of being a good student is really important, and excelling in your studies was hugely important in my family, and whenever I would come home from school, I was definitely that like Lisa Simpson student, like straight A's my whole life. And I'd come home from school and, I'd get like a 96 or a 98 on a test. And my parents' first question, both my mom and my dad, would always be like, well, what happened to the other 2 points? And I remember at the time, one, it was a really annoying question because I'm like, but I'm getting a 96 or a 98. My friends are getting like 75. What is going on here, people? But also it was that seed of that appreciation that like, is this your best? Does the 96 or the 98 or the 75, whatever it is, actually reflect your capabilities, your abilities, the best that you can do? Or is there something more? That exploration and that understanding that like, are you testing your potential and are you fulfilling your potential? Because, I fundamentally believe that human beings are infinitely capable, and of course, like, there are exceptions to everything, but like, we don't lack for capability or potential. We lack for opportunity, for teachers, for coaches, for, the right context in which to thrive. And so I really actually appreciated that question because it forced me to check myself, right? And say, actually, well, did I prepare the best that I could in this instance? And does that 96 or 98 reflect the best I could have done on the day? Maybe it does, but maybe it doesn't. And so that idea of, is there more, or what more could there be? Like that sense of the possible and the not just letting one result or one test or one outcome of something be the defining thing, and to always be questioning, not obsessively seeking perfection, because I don't think perfection exists, but always seeking that answer to, well, what else is there? What more could there be? And that for me is what excellence is really about, is not sort of resting on your laurels, not taking for granted that just because something worked yesterday, it's going to work tomorrow. And, not throwing everything out, but like the baby with the bathwater, right? But at least being open to the possibility that there is more, there is a different way, or maybe a better way, or maybe the same way, but just, at least asking that question. So that's how it showed up for me from a very young age. And that sort of approach is that something that I carried with me throughout my whole career. And it was both within the work that I was doing, whether at the CIA or once I left, but also in how I charted the uncertainties in between those career pivots and what came next. It was just, again, going back to that idea of exploration and experimentation instead of just definitively, this is it. And that's, and cutting everything else off.
I think there's a really nice distinction as I'm hearing you say this, because asking that question is also encouraging belief in yourself as well. Because I think that like growing up, I did not ask those questions because I was very much like good enough because I didn't have like the self-esteem to feel as though I could do better as a child. So I think it's an interesting, and I've only now started to ask myself questions like that of holding myself to a certain standard. And I think it's really valuable. And I just want to like call out that distinction because I know some people may like, oh, that's just not me. Like, like some people don't have that kind of checks and balances with themselves. And I think I'm only recently understanding the importance of that, again, to like hold yourself accountable, to believe in yourself, to believe that you have the potential to do whatever it is that you want to do, to believe you could always be doing, like you said, the sky's the limit really with the human potential. I agree with you completely on that. So like, that's a belief too, that's in there.
Yeah. And one of the things that sort of is drawn out from that, or for me is an extension of that, is this idea that we can be our own role models. Because I think so much of our social conversation is around like this whole idea of you have to see it to be it, you know, and you need someone that you can point to that has done that or broken that barrier or her. But why can't it be you, right? Like, why can't we be the ones to prove what is possible, to challenge the status quo, to create the progress and the change that we need in the world? Why not, right? Because if something hasn't happened before, somebody needs to be the first. So why can't it be you? And it's not, yes, of course, it's not that simple, right? I think some things are essential in enabling that self-belief and that resilience. And I think so much of it is the people we have around us can make a huge impact on our self-belief or on what we think is possible. But fundamentally, I believe that this conversation around role models is a distraction from people appreciating that they are capable of being role models and they can do the hard things that, you know, they appreciate in others. And often, and I can't remember where this came up, often what we admire in others is because we sense that there is an element of that in ourselves. So actually even having a role model is a reflection of you back on yourself. And so I think, again, not always looking externally for inspiration, but appreciating that we can do those same things. It's something that we need to talk more about because it is fundamentally true.
And it's so interesting because I had a conversation with a colleague in the entrepreneurial space yesterday, and he has written a book as well called Super Bold, but his whole, it's really tying into this. And I want to even bring it back to something you say, which he says, you know, it's like boldness is not a personality trait. It's a life skill. Mm. And so it's exactly what you're speaking to, right? Like you're saying, like, you have to own your weird. And that's kind of what I wanted to bring it back to. It's like owning your weird, being who you are makes you the first at everything through your lens and through your perspective. And you can achieve excellence. You can, master your potential. You can do all the things if you are able to know that that's where you move from, right? And we, and that conversation, I also think looking external, like it's important to have it as a motivator, but it's only one aspect to motivation. But oftentimes we externalize our power because we're looking at others and the formula. And Maggie and I are so like anti-formula to the way things, how we can be, where it's like, I use that word, deliberately. Like, it's like, we want to be so formulaic. Like, we want to be like, okay, so Obama did it this way. I can do it that way. Like, let me read the memoir. Let me find this, okay, he wakes up at this time in the morning. Like, he practices basketball for, and it's like, it's not like that if that's not your weird. You know what I mean? Like, if it's not your weird. So I would love for you to talk about like owning your weird as you already have, but kind of continue that a little bit here as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I love the way you've brought it into this conversation around role models, because you're so right. What works for President Obama is not going to work for you. You're different people, right? And I think we have the social conversation and the way we talk about success, whether in movies or in magazines or on, social media, whatever. It is formulaic, right? It's like, I did this and then I hustled and I grinded and I did this and then I did this. And then it's this sort of this like very linear cause and effect chain of reactions, right? But the reality is everybody knows, even those people who are portraying that success story in that way, knows that there is so much more mess behind the scenes. And sometimes you cover over it because it is really tedious. And sometimes you cover over it because you want to portray a certain perception of things. But the reality is there is no formula. There are ideas and there are ways of, again, not reinventing the wheel, right? We don't have to constantly question everything, but it's not going to be the exact step process that other people follow because their lives are different. Their resources are different. Where they're starting from is different. Their personalities are different. Their, the challenges and their expectations and the commands and demands on their time are different. So there is no apples for apples comparison possible because of all of those things, right? And this idea of owning your weird is really about accepting the fact that you are who you are, right? And you don't have to apologize for it. I always have an asterisk there, like to caveat, say, as long as you're not an asshole, right? As long as you're not like a disrespectful human being, you are who you are. Most people are not. So it's okay to be who you are, to acknowledge where you think there might be some room for growth, but not obsess over like fixing everything that's wrong with you. And just accepting that at this point in your lives, I'm guessing most of your listeners or viewers are, sort of 20s plus, right? You've had a lot of life experience and you are who you are. And so it's okay to accept that, to own that, and then to leverage that. You have specific strengths to you. You have specific experiences that are just yours. You have so much richness that is just who you are that it's not really relevant, really, to think about what other people have got because they're not you. And, this often comes up a lot in like the creative arts. People are like, oh, well, I shouldn't really write a book or start a podcast because it's all been said before. It's all been done before, but it hasn't all been said and done before by you. And again, like if we look back thousands of years, the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, the ancient Indians, like they've said it all. They've done it all, right? Like barring some technological inventions that are, of course, much more modern, pretty much everything has been said and done and analyzed to death, but not by you. And so that unique spin, that unique life experience, that unique reflection, like you put it earlier, Urvi, that lens is what makes it worth sharing because people will resonate with you in different ways than they resonate with me. People, some people really love Shakespeare. Some people really like Jonathan Franzen. Doesn't mean either one of them shouldn't have written because, they talk about themes of love and betrayal. I mean, again, it's all been done before. And so there is an infinite opportunity for you to be who you are and turn that into something that you admire in others, whether it's through your career or your creativity or your, whatever you want to put out into the world. It can be you, and that is enough.
Just like for those who are not watching this and are just listening, one, there's a lot of vigorous head nodding, and then there's also just like Maggie and I, like, yes, check, this is incredible. No, yeah, that's like singing directly into my soul as you share that. And I really appreciate the creativity component here. You just bringing that forward because Maggie and I, like, we think about that all the time, and like there's just we should probably get commission on the books that we share about that. But like The Creative Act by Rick Rubin, A Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, and like Julia Cameron's Artist's Way, we always talk about them. And we talk about them because and there's so many more that talk about the process of creativity, the process of, and I think we also think of creativity very, I think it's put in a box, and actually like creativity informs every single thing that we all do in every single shape and form. And it's like, there's some universal truths around creativity. And you start to read about these ultra creative people who have channeled their creativity, as you're kind of describing. You start to see like, what are those, unspoken rules, if I use rules loosely, but they're not really rules, right? Like they're just unspoken truths almost of like, this is how it comes through, and this is what it comes through. And it's like the power of creation, then it's the power of interpretation, and then it's the power of, kind of how it becomes collective, right? And those are all out of control. And I think it's in the Creative Act where Rick Rubin talks about that, and he says, like, it's, if you ask any artist, if you ask any creator, it's like when they create, they know that the creation, like, that what they can control is where it stops with once they put it out. And then after that, it's like how that person interprets it, how each person engages with it, that changes that piece of art, right? And so when we think about like writing or talking on this podcast or going out and sharing a message, we're also, or doing whatever we think is in our potential, even if others have done that before, what's happening is like our voice is being curated through the interpretation and experience of others. And we learn much more from that, right? Than we ever did just sitting in a room, like, as you know, writing a book or like writing a blog or creating a podcast. Like, we can only predict what could be engaging, but really sometimes it hits us hard when something, like when we have an episode that we're like, wow, that was it. We think every episode's incredible. But like, whoa, look how, the audience or the listeners reacted to this one versus this one, and why, and what's happening seasonally. And like, like there's so much to that. So the ability. Yeah.
I think this builds really nicely on what you were sharing earlier also about the formula, right? Because you can follow a formula. You can try to unpack and analyze what worked in that episode versus what you might think, but it is just random, right? There is literally no accounting for taste. Again, the three of us, we're aligned on many of our sort of outlooks and our approach to life, I imagine, but we probably have different opinions about the same books or about music or about all of these things. And it is just random. And that's why it is so important to start practicing, because it is a lifelong practice, in my view, to divest that or to separate the what you do from the expected result, right? So you can put out a great podcast. You can put out a piece of work that you've put your heart and soul and everything you possibly could. And it might do well. It might do not. It might be, somewhere in between. There is just no way to predict it. There really is no way. And, even mega famous creators have works of art that they're a bit about, but then it has this like crazy success. So one of the books that you referenced there was Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic. And one of the things that I think is so wonderful about what she talks about in that book, and I listen to it at least once or twice a year. I mean, every single year, because there's always something wonderful in it that I take away differently or just refines. But anyway, she talks about just committing to the process, right? Because what is the alternative? That you don't create, that you don't write or share a story or put your message out there. And like, if the lack of the result you want is so painful to you that you are not willing to keep doing it, then that's your choice. But the other alternative is to never create again. And that is just not a price I'm willing to pay, right? Regardless of the outcome, regardless of the accolades or lack thereof, I am just not willing to stop being a writer, stop being a creator, because for me, the act itself is the reason. And of course, you want the outcome and you want the success and the fame and the money and all of those great things. But even if, and the likelihood is that it probably never will come statistically, right? For most of us, even if it doesn't happen for me, I would rather live a creative life full of exploring ideas than one that doesn't have that. And so I think it's also about keeping it in perspective, because you can't game the outcome. You can't predict the outcome. And you just got to be committing to something that is enough in itself. And that's the reward. I mean, it really is. Like, creativity is its own reward, and be okay with that.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I think what I like so much about what you're saying, because I've been in like spirit fairyland over here in Bali, where it's like I've been on this like spiritual experience after spiritual experience. And, I do agree with the phrase, like, we're spiritual beings having a human experience. But like, what does that mean? It's like exactly like what you're saying and what you're doing. It's like, I'm just being me. Like, I'm just like a unique expression that I'm just sharing. And like the creative act, or like the art of creation, like I understand what that means to be human. Like, to me, that's like what it means to be a human, is to be a creator. And it's something that I liked Elizabeth Gilbert's book so much, because she brought that to the forefront, where it's like everyone is a creator. It's like, it's not about like this or that. So learning how to do that, and the consistent practice. But I am curious if you do have a way to like, how do you stay tuned into that voice within you that's like, this is what I want to do now. Like how does that work for you? Like, how does that process work for you? Not as a formula, but just as a curiosity of like, how do you tune in and like stay connected to that part of you that's like, this is what I want to do next?
Oh, there is no single answer to that. I think a couple of things that I do is I pay attention. I pay attention to and emotions are not a great predictor, right? Or they're not a great motivator for like a consistent formula, because if you feel like something or you don't feel like something, that's not like the best way of having a formula, right? For me, it really is about tuning into that emotion of, well, what am I really excited about sharing? Like, so excited about sharing that I'm thinking about it all the time, that I'm sort of jotting down notes in my phone as ideas come to me. Like, what is that thing or things? And then taking the time to listen to that emotion and then doing something productive with it. And I'll give you a very tangible example of this. Like, my first book, I had been wanting to write something in like the nonfiction space for probably the better part of let's say 5 years, right? And I was constantly tinkering on the edges. Like I was, I've got a newsletter where I do short form versions of some of the ideas that I was really excited to put out into the world. But it wasn't like all of that was happening. And I was so excited that I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do a book this year and do it now. It took a long time until the pain of not writing that book was greater than the pain of forcing myself. And I call it pain because I'm not, it just felt like it was going to be a big undertaking. And the pain of not doing it was greater than the pain of doing it. And so, and this ties into the other part of the process for me. And I alluded to it earlier, is about the people you have around you and the context you can curate around you. I know for a fact that for me, unless I had some external accountability, it was just going to take another 6 years before I came out into or something, right? And so because, again, I was paying attention to myself, I know who I am, I know what my weaknesses are, my blind spots are, I hired someone to help with that initial stage to get me over that hump. And we didn't do any writing together. She didn't do anything other than really provide accountability and deadlines and give me homework. So it was like, okay, write 500 words this week, or send me your first chapter by this time, or whatever else it was, right? And literally just those two very small things, very specific, discrete tasks, and external accountability with some form of a deadline were the things that unlocked that magical process for me. Mm-hmm. So it is about, of course, paying attention to you and what's exciting you and what's, for me, what was exciting me and where sort of I'm constantly going back to. But it's also about creating that space in which I can then deliver on what is exciting me instead of it just staying in my head and it being this theoretical thing.
Yeah. And I hear you. Like I've recently been immersed in a lot, and I do support people with kind of, I would say intuition cultivation from a perspective of unleashing that locked energy, right? In order to kind of be guided to what you want to create. And so one of the things in what you're speaking about in the emotional, it's not about the ebb and flow of that emotion, but it's about understanding the current of the intuition, right? Or the emotion. Sorry, I should say it's not the ebb and flow, but the emotion. It's okay, it's what's the current of the emotion telling me? And that's that's the intuitive spark, right? And that's when you decide, I hear you say the pain of not creating was becoming more, than the pain of creating. And that was because that current showed you that, right? And that was what the emotion was driving. So you weren't driven by the emotion of that daily flux. I will say, I wouldn't describe it as a daily flux of oh, this isn't working, oh, that is working, right? And that kind of pull. But you were what is truly motivating me in that in this season to actually create the thing that there is an idea around.
And also it's about the emotional side and all of those intangibles that you just shared, but also the tangible side of things, because so many of us get stuck. And I do this too. The book is a perfect example of oh, I want to write a book someday. Oh, I want to start a podcast. Oh, I want to do this. And then we just leave it as this vague wish that we've just put out into the world and expect it to fall into our laps. Well, actually you got to do some damn work, right? Yeah. And so it's also about being very practical and understanding what is the thing that you care enough about that you really, really want to do, that if you're on your deathbed and when you're 100 years old, you'll be damn, I wish I had done that thing. And for me, writing a book was one of those things. So it's okay, well, I can't just keep talking about this. What are the steps I need to take to actually do this thing? And I had this great people around me who, would hear me talk about, oh, I want to do this and I want to do that. And they'd be okay, well, what's the book about? And I'd be oh, yeah, I guess I have to think about that, right? I guess I have to structure it. I guess I have to start experimenting and doing all of the doing. The same thing was with my TED Talk. I've been talking about doing a TED Talk forever. And again, those similar same two friends who were sort of on me about the book, they're okay, well, what's the talk about? I was oh yeah, I guess I have to think about the reality of making it a reality and the steps needed to go and make it come true, as opposed to just leaving it at this vague wish. And then once you realize there's actually tangible work that you can do, it takes away so much of the pressure, right? Because all of a sudden, instead of hoping and wishing and yearning, you can do something. You can literally Google, and this is what I did. I Googled how do I apply to be a TED speaker, right? And I went through that process. I got rejected from that process, but it happened in a different way, right? So, and that's the other thing is like, once you start putting things in motion, that's when what people often describe as luck starts to come your way, because it's not luck. You're doing the work, you're showing up, you're putting yourself out there with intention and, again, a bit of like trial and error. But that's when you start to see the opportunities, when you start to notice the clues that, sort of were always there, and you can start acting on them. So all of these things like, oh, I wish I could do this. You don't have to keep wishing. You can literally just Google it and then start doing something, and then let the momentum not carry you, but the momentum will start to build as you are consistent about taking that action.
Well, and the next step unfolds. And I think it comes back to your earlier point, which is like, this is the divesting from, the act of creating and the results. Because I think why people get stuck from like taking that step forward, because we know, right? Like all we have to do is Google, like, or ask, right? Like it's a very simple thing. Like I'm literally like, I wrote a children's, Rupal, you probably don't know yet, but like I did a manuscript for a children's book. It's like done, ready to go. And I'm like, there's multiple routes to publishing. I have no idea like what route to go, blah, blah, blah. Right. And I was like, okay, I know this friend who wrote a children's book. I literally DM'd her that day. That led to a conversation, which led to a conversation with like her publisher, which like led to like an invitation to an event that like I got to meet the whole publishing. And I'm like, and that was like 3 weeks. And I'm like, that was not even a glimmer of an idea that that's even possible. I didn't even know that there was this thing, that this place that I could meet them. Like, it's like a fascinating, right, world. And I will tell you, like, I have been in other states in my life stuck in that place, absolutely stuck in the places we've talked about already, where it's like, one, why me? It's not original, right?
Yep.
I've been stuck in like, okay, even like, what is like my message in that? Like, where's my uniqueness? Like, where's my weird? And maybe I'm too weird, like that, like dance. I've been stuck in like completely the result and the act are attached so significantly that it's like completely paralyzing, I would say. Right. And like that. And now I'm like, okay, if you don't know. And I think my children enrich this process for me every day because I'm like seeing it, clean slate. Like I'm like, they're like, well, how do I do this? And so, well, like, I had to ask them, well, how would you do? Like, what's your approach? Right. And so like that maybe has really now finally integrated within me to be able to say, like, every day, I'm like, so what would you do? Like, you are absolutely a person who can do this. You've done a lot of things. So what is the first step you would take? And just take that first step and learn. And I think the other thing I wanted to share about, like you said, the linearness, right? And that's really important here too, because I think there's a linear nature to all of our thinking, right? In our societally, I would say. And that linearity also has a time component.
Of
and
course.
I think that's really, probably I say like, there's a lot of troublesomeness in always attaching ourselves to timing because we saw this person did it in like 3 months. So like I have to do it. And even when you said like 5 years, there is a tremendous amount that happened in those 5 years to get you to like this, you know what I mean? Like it informed this like so beautifully, and I'm holding the book, but I'm like, it was so essential. And I can see that like now too, where I'm like, oh, like I use this word and, I say like the divinity or the luck or whatever you consider, really it was staying true to the time that was needed and how it unfolds.
Yes. Because you can't force these things. You can't rush these things. And the way I've encapsulated it to myself, and it's become sort of like a personal mantra, is you can decide the what, but you have to be open and semi-agnostic about the how and the when, because you can't force the process to take any longer or shorter than it's going to take. And also the way it comes about, like you were just sharing with your book, right? It wasn't perhaps what you imagined it. It was just having a conversation that led to another conversation that led to another conversation. The same is true of my TED Talk. I was devastated when I got that rejection, and then it happened in a different way. So I had decided the what. The what was, I want to do a TED Talk. I want to write a book. And the how it happened and the when it happened, I had to be willing to, and I hate saying this because it sounds so like, oh, I'm so, like Zen and detached from the world. I am not, but you have to just surrender to the process and the time and the how. Like I said, be very clear about the what, very intentional about the what, right? That is so, of course, important. But whether it takes 5 years or 10 years or 50 years, does it really matter? Because that time's going to go anyway, right? We're all going to be hopefully 100 one day. So whether the next 40 years of our lives are spent pursuing that dream or agonizing about and like moaning about the fact that it's not happening, that's still going to pass. So you just have to give up on how long you think things are going to take, how long you think they're supposed to take, and just decide the outcome that you, or the thing that you want to put into the world. Not even the outcome, the thing that you want to bring into the world, the what, and everything else. Just let it happen when it happens. Do what you can do. Of course, it's not going to just happen magically. But like I said, decide the what, be agnostic about the how and the when.
And like taking those steps, right? Like when you take a step, and I think the thing you're really highlighting for me, which is inspiring, as well, which is like, I've noticed how when I did what you shared, which is like divest, right? Like detach, I was like, it's become fun. And so the time doesn't actually matter anymore. It like reduces the relevancy of it and the like anxiety around when it's going to unfold because you're like doing it. You know what I mean? So it's like, if you're just putting pen to paper, or if you're just like getting out there and like picking up a paintbrush again, or like whatever, it like I think we forget the beauty of creation and the fun
100%.
of creation. And that like literally eliminates a lot of the stress
For sure.
that exists when you're not doing it.
100%. And the only other thing I wanted to sort of draw out from what you shared earlier was the timing thing, because it's also really tricky I think it's tricky for everyone, but women in particular, because we are sold this story that like we have a shelf life, that, beyond a certain age, we lose our beauty, or we lose our charm, or we lose our relevance, or no one wants to hear from an old woman, or all of this shit, right? Sorry for the language. And
No,
I think for me, one of the things that I've realized is like, who cares, right? It's becoming so much more irrelevant. There's people who have done everything that we've wanted to do early in life, late in life. Like there is no glory in doing it sooner or younger or faster or whatever, as long as you do the thing that you wanted to do. And this is true, I think, especially when it comes to, again, the way women are told and sold what success is supposed to look like, what, for example, parenthood is supposed to look like, and what kind of a parent and a professional and a partner and all of these things you're supposed to be. Like, I've done everything wrong, right? Like I had multiple careers that sort of set me back in different, people may have sort of sold it that way. It's like, oh, well, you're changing career in your 30s. That's kind of risky. I had my kids in my late 30s and, early 40s. Like, this is against all of the noise, right? All of the way things are done that we are sold as women. And I mean, I will be very honest, like, I didn't start losing my beauty when I was 24. And I think many women, we start to peak in our 40s because we let go of that noise and that nonsense around who we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to please everyone. And this idea of like just stepping into our power so much more. And so it doesn't matter how long it takes. The time is irrelevant. The time scale people put on things are not your own. They're things that others have told you or sold you, and it's not real, And there are so many examples of like, I love using these in particular because they're so extreme and just show how ridiculous we are about time. But, Misty Copeland, who was the first Black principal ballerina for the New York City Ballet or American Ballet. Sorry, I can't remember. She was 13 when she first started doing ballet. 13 is not old, but by ballet standards, she may as well have been like an old hag, right? I mean, you're supposed to start when you're 3 if you want to reach that level. She was 13. More sort of, I guess, universally accepted as old was Arianna Huffington, who started the Huffington Post when she was, I think, 54 or 56, right? And now the Huffington Post is one of the like biggest media organizations in the world. Like there is time. There is time. Don't sit around and wait for things to happen. But who cares if you start when you're 30 or 40 or 50 or 70? You're gonna, again, I go back to that phrase, like the time will pass anyway. You're going to be older one year after another anyway. So you can start anything at any time.
Yes. And I hear you saying, I hear that. And I also think about like, it's cumulative, right? To at least that's great. That's the benefit. And like you accumulate all of these great things like experiences and, perspectives and people, around you. And I don't mean to like say accumulate, like possessive as an accumulation, but like, your interactions and your relationships and all of that teaches you stuff. And I completely like cannot agree more about this like whole after 30 you're dead for women situation where I'm like, okay, but you were dead before 30, so now like what happened? Like, so were we ever alive anyway, right? Like this this toxicity in our culture around like women and achievement and like
our shelf life, right?
Yes, our shelf life and everything from like how the healthcare system treats us. And yeah, I will not get into all of that. I would like another conversation for another day, but I read an alarming thing I do want to share here because I feel like it's like, let's make sure we all become cognizant of it, which is like Elvest it was just sharing about, like now there's a healthcare cost gap or like, in that way that women pay more for like the fact that they have cancer than men do. So like with the raising rates of cancer and more being under the age of 50 diagnosed because of like advanced technology, now even the cost of the healthcare they get is women pay a higher rate than men do. And I'm like, so between the wage and the wealth gap, now you have an added cost, which is like, let me just put that here. I'm going to put that here. And then I'm
out there. It's also partly why we all need to do the work, right? Like why we all like it's not, again, this goes back to there's room for everyone. Like there are so many organizations like Elvest, like, that are working on just highlighting some of the challenges women face. There are writers, there are journalists, there are organizations, there are startups, there's all of this stuff. But these problems are so entrenched and the inequalities are so entrenched on many different levels that we need all hands on deck. So if you've got an idea for a startup or for a business or for a magazine or whatever, there's room, right? Because everybody needs to be chipping away at these things because they are monumental and we're going against literally hundreds of years of things being a certain way to now just starting to shake things up for reals. So, and I'm just going to add another little sort of tangent on this point because I think it's worth discussing given what we were talking about women and our shelf life and progress or lack thereof. Like, actually, I'm going to ask you too. In America, it was not possible for a woman to get a bank loan or apply for a mortgage or get access to any financial product without a man co-signing it until what year?
Probably like 1963.
1974. Yeah. 1974 was 50 years ago, right? So this whole narrative that we've been sold around, oh, well, women's equality exists and there's been so much progress. Why are we still talking about this stuff? I'm sorry. For the first 500 years of human sort of commerce and mercantile systems, women have been financially dispossessed. And only for the past 50 have we had access to the power, the wealth, the influence that comes from commanding financial resources, right? So let's not pretend ourselves about how much progress has been made, but also how much more we need to do to create that equality of the world, right? And the way we are treated as individuals. And, again, this is not to just go on a bit of a feminist soapbox. This is the reality, right? In America, in Switzerland, women couldn't vote in federal elections till 1971, right? This is not like, sort of the 18th century. This is very, very recent history. So we all need to contribute in whatever way we can. And it can happen through art. It can happen through activism. It can happen through business. It can happen through podcasts. There's room for all of us because there is so much damn work to do.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, this is our history. Yeah,
I mean, and even like the law may have changed, but the belief hasn't. There's still a lot of ingrained belief around how things should work. So.
Exactly.
And like and this is something that I actively work in, and it's like I think about it a lot. I support people with it, but it's like where I also think is like it's so deeply entrenched, like you just said, Maggie, is like yes, our systems are a certain way. But now they're so deeply entrenched because of the intergenerational like conformity or conditioning that we're really, even through our actions and like, unless we make it aware, like for example, even talking about the shelf life, right? Unless we make it aware that how systems are affecting us and then how we ourselves are perpetuating them, we cannot be disruptive, right? And so we will continue to perpetuate the same or propagate the same issues that, hold us back, that both internally and externally if we're not really becoming aware. And so like,
Exactly.
again, the rising tide lifts all boats. So we need everybody to talk about it and make light of it and then collaborate around it too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in order for us to like be truly innovative and liberatory, like that's kind of where we need to be.
Yes.
I mean, we all agree we need to be there.
Yes.
I was going to say, I was at a place of like stagnancy personally and professionally, and now I'm just like ready to go after this conversation.
Do it! 100%. Yeah. Well, and again, sorry, I'm going to tie, thank you for sharing that, Maggie, because I think sometimes it's, we can fall, all of us can fall into just like a comfort and a level of like, just this is my routine and this is what I care about and this is my world that I've sort of built around me. But my view is that I won't say we all. The reason I do what I do, the reason I work on the issues that I work on and I try to raise awareness about things is because there are still billions of women on this planet who don't have that privilege. They don't have a voice. They don't have a vote. They don't have access to any of the things that we have access to, listening to podcasts, much less creating podcasts, and also a really deep-seated awareness of my duty to the people in my own history and my own lineage. None of us, no matter where you're from, none of us have to go back more than 2 or 3 generations to confront relatives or ancestors who were in some way either oppressed or not given access to various rights or privileges. And it is true for all of us. It is true for all of us. Again, maybe some people have to go back 5 generations, some go back 6, but unless your family from the second it, creeped out of the swamp and turned into, Neanderthal man and then stood upright, was always like the village head man, was always the king, was always the, whatever. All of our families have gone through a lot to enable the fact of our existence, but also the fact that we have the privilege and access and the resources that we all have now. So I have a debt, a massive debt that I view that I owe to that lineage of mine, and I have the privilege and access to do it. Everybody does not have that. There's, whether it's women or people of color or, just human beings in different parts of the world, we live in an unequal society, an unequal place, world. And those of us who can, I think, should.
And I think not to bring in the subject of epigenetics, but like what you're also talking about is like that is carried in our DNA, right? Like our ancestry is more than just, our mutations or really like those, that aspect of it, but it's also like the behaviors and the environment that they were in and that they, lived through. Right. That were imprinted, that have carried through. And so I think like even at that molecular, I'm going to use the word molecular. I'm not going to get to that word today. The molecular level, right? Like it's in our existence. So how do we disrupt that through like our potential, like coming back to like kind of the top of our and our excellence. Like I even see excellence, I'm viewing excellence differently because of this conversation, so thank you for that, because I'm like, okay, potential excellence, but it's like how it's so important to like creating the future and building the future that we all like really want and we all belong in,
For sure.
Hey, Rupal, our last question of this episode. What are you noticing today?
Oh, gosh. Well, I'm noticing that I just got chills as you asked me that question. I'm noticing, so much of what we've talked about and my sort of view of my own life experience and journey, I've realized that now at this stage of where I am, and hopefully a place that many of us will get to eventually, is I will put it very, very bluntly, is to have a case of the fuckets, right? And by this, I mean, like, just letting go of that burden of who we're supposed to be or who others want us to be or what we expected by when certain things should have happened, and just be like, fuck it. I'm just going to try it, right? Like, I don't care what you think. I don't care what you think. I'm going to be true to myself. I'm going to, again, not be an asshole and, be evil in any way, but like, this is literally the one shot we've got. And this basically ties in every single thing that we've talked about today, whether it's excellence or potential, being a role model, being the change, all of that great stuff. Like, this is the one shot we have on being alive in this planet at this time. Like, fuck it, just do it, right? Like, don't care so much about all of the baggage others have saddled you with, all of the things that you thought should have been or could have been or whatever. Like, in the end, it doesn't matter really. And so just do you, right? Who cares? Like, genuinely, who cares? So yeah, hopefully you will all now have sort of this contagious effect of the fuckets.
Yeah. It's like you're giving a new interpretation of fuck around and find out, to be honest. And I like this one.
Yeah.
You're like, just fuck around and find out, but positively.
And it's also, and fuck around and find out is more external, right? For me, the fuckets is internal. It's personal. It's like, I don't care. I genuinely don't care. I'm not going to be a bad person. I'm trying my best at whatever I'm doing. So whatever happens, whatever you think, I genuinely don't care. And that is a really hard one place to be. But I think it's really liberating. And if anything we shared today can hopefully accelerate that in anyone else, I hope that is at least one of the outcomes of this wonderful conversation with you both.
Yeah, I think it will. It's empowering. It's really just like it's how you take your power back too. Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been
but before we forget, sometimes I forget, where can people find you?
The best place to find me is probably my website. So it's rupalpatel.com. You have to put in the Y because there are many other Rupal Patels in the world. So yeah, rupalpatel.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I don't know, we're saying this to everybody, but we might just like repeat the season with part 2 with every one of our guests. And so we're going to have to make some time for that.
We'll do it. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.